Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Angie Rasmussen, Science Chair of the Save America Movement. Welcome to a very special episode of Angie's Daily Rant. It's not really Angie's Daily Rant. Now it's Angie and Liz's Daily Rant because I'd like to introduce you to my awesome guest today. That is Dr. Liz Ginexi, or Elizabeth Ginexi, who is a career NIH program officer who, like many of her extraordinary colleagues, are no longer at NIH for reasons that we are going to be discussing in depth today. Because I would say that Liz, I have learned so much from about some of the things that people don't really like to talk about. And that is policy, because it's quite boring. Most people fall asleep when you start telling them about federal grant making, especially if you're talking about NIH grants, because, oh, I applied for my R01 and my P01 and my U19 and my R03 and my K99. And, this alphabet soup of different things. And there's all these different rules and blah, 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 blah. And so it's not always the most exciting topic. But what I really think is extraordinary is that Liz somehow manages to make it not only, I wouldn't say exciting, but dire. It's gripping to read Liz's Substack, which is at elizabethginexi.substack.com, because it really does explain all of the ways that Russell Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, and all of the little MAGA Maha minions are really manipulating things administratively behind the scenes to completely take out NIH. And one of the things I think that, is most engaging for a lot of people is the fact that when you read what you're writing, I mean, I've gotten this a long time ago, but not all of our colleagues have, and a lot of the public has not. And that is what the goal of all of this is. And I think that Liz really, really gets that to a point that, I mean, I've learned so much from her about federal grant making outside of NIH that I never realized, for example, until your post last week, that, we're not talking about NIH grants here. We're not talking about biomedical research. We're literally talking about almost everything, every service that the government provides. Most people don't know. And again, we don't have to think about it. This is like what happens, I think, with people when things are working. Vaccines are another example of this. When things are working, people don't remember what it was like when they weren't working. And we've just had this, incredible system. We've got this huge federal government, and it's not perfect, but it really does a lot for the individual states. It funds things like roads and fire departments and libraries and healthcare, in addition to funding, academic biomedical research. So we're going to get into all of that today. But I wanted to just, Liz, what do you want to talk about first? Because you're really the expert on this.
Sure.
And what fresh horrors await us this week?
That's right. Well, first, thanks for having me. I've been a fan for a while, watching and the Save America movement and all of these videos. I've kept abreast from you. And just so folks know, I'm not affiliated with the NIH anymore. I was there for 22 years as a scientific program official, overseeing a science portfolio there. And being there for so long, I know how it works, or how it used to work. And I started writing about it on Substack because I saw that people were in denial about what was happening at the NIH. And I think people figured that as long as Congress passed the budget, everything would be fine. And meanwhile, it's not. It's far from fine. And I have lots of dear friends who are still inside. And I thought, well, no one's telling the story. Why not me? So I started my Substack in December, mostly as a therapeutic writing exercise for myself, because I was still traumatized from Doge ripping through and from leadership kowtowing and all of that. I didn't think anyone would read it, but it turns out people were hungry for it. So here I am. And to the story about denialism or head in the sand, 2 weeks ago, I was at a scientific conference in Washington, D.C., when the news about this OMB rule dropped. And I downloaded it to my laptop in the conference. And you can imagine, I'm sitting in science sessions and I'm reading this PDF and highlighting sections with my eye toward how will this affect the scientific research community. And with the little PDF highlighter, I said, oh, this section's awful. This section's awful. This section's awful. And I kept going and going. And I decided I would check with my colleagues at the conference to say, you know, this thing is happening with OMB and they're going to destroy the scientific enterprise. Do you know? And they said, what's OMB? Who's Russell Vogt? And Liz, you're just being alarmist. So I went home that night and I thought, oh my God, they have no idea. They have no idea. And I decided to come up with a sort of top 10 list like David Letterman, right? What are the top 10 things, if I could tell these scientists, that will happen from this rule that will make their hair go on fire? What would those be? And it turned out to be more than 10. I think it was like 18. And I wrote it on my Substack and I hit send and I went to bed and never thought about it until my phone started buzzing crazy the next day. And it never occurred to me that no one was paying attention to this. It never occurred to me that no one would translate what was in that document and tell the scientific research community how it would affect them. The fact that I was the first person, or maybe the only person in that 24-hour period, to think that this was a crisis, and I don't even have a job. I'm an unemployed person who can't get a job because I left NIH, right? Isn't that crazy?
It's nuts, but I think what people don't realize is that we're all going to be unemployed people, whether you're working at NIH, whether you're working, you know, I've talked to, I was talking to Dimitri Daskalakis, the former director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases at the CDC. And he describes the people who are still at CDC essentially as hostages. And, you know, I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to hold on to your job, to want to try to fix things from the inside. There's nothing wrong with my colleagues in academia holding on to their labs to make sure that their trainees can continue working and that they can continue actually fulfilling the grants that they have been awarded and they do have. But I don't think that people understand like what the end game is here. And, you know, my view of this, and I had read Project 2025. So a lot of people, and I think that just too many academics thought, well, the NIH is so big and it's so sprawling and it's always been there. You know, it's still going to be there. It's always been historically so bipartisan. The Republicans support it. But this is not the same Republican Party. And, you know, I'm not actually affiliated with any political party. At this point, I am just opposed to the current party that's in power because they are not really Republicans. They're authoritarians and they're trying to take down the government. What really alarmed me so much was that I don't have the policy expertise that you do. I mean, I know what OMB is. I know what the Office of Management and Budget Director does. And I knew who Russell Vogt was just because I had read Project 2025. But I think a lot of people, you know, I got a lot of, it's not going to be that bad. We're going to get through it. I've had so many people, especially people who've left academia, you know, and they're in industry, said, well, you're going to be just as much trouble as we are, because where do you think your new scientists are coming from? We don't have any trainees anymore. We don't have a training pipeline. And you know what? They're not going to come back here. They're going to go to China, or they're going to go someplace where there is actually funding and sustainably around the world. That is one place, and that is China. So not only is the American government essentially taking all this stuff down, and Project 2025 is really chilling. I mean, you should read it because Russell Vogt has been going down this list of things that he wants to do, and he's been checking them off. But this is also what Joseph Stalin did, and specifically did to science in the Soviet Union. He was imposing a policy of forced collectivism, where basically he was stealing land from people and forcing them onto these collective farms and factories. And the collective farming thing hooked up with this pseudoscientific dude named Trofim Lysenko, who made up basically a way to like all kinds of crazy stuff. Initially it was to like grow wheat in Siberia, but then it became, okay, yeah, now I can turn cabbage into corn. and we can grow like pineapples in Russia. And I mean, just made all this stuff up, made up his own journals, published it. And it's eerie how much of it is similar to what's happening within HHS and specifically within NIH today. But that was a major mechanism by which Stalin consolidated power. And I didn't realize like that he actually outlawed genetics. I knew that like scientists, and especially a lot of Jewish scientists, were sent to gulags, but I didn't really realize until I looked into the details how targeted it was. And we are actually seeing sort of a modern day version of that today, where people who are speaking up are being punished and they're being retaliated against very severely. And people like you, the people who made things work, were eliminated before you could even really do anything.
Right. And in my case,
really
I wasn't riffed or anything. I'm a sort of person with my eyes wide open kind of person. I am not a head in the sand person. So as soon as Doge came in and started doing what they were doing, once I understood the gravity of it all, and that the leadership at the NIH wasn't going to stop it or wasn't able to stop it, and anyone that was going to speak up, like Jeannie Mirazzo, would get the guillotine, right? I was not in charge of anything. I figured they're going to fire me because I'm not going to be able to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah.
And also, not to mention, the job has changed. As a scientific program official, your job is to be an expert in your scientific area, but also you have to be an expert in all of the grants policy, in all of the minutia of the bureaucratic aspects of grant making. And
I should add, as an investigator, it's been incredibly helpful. So I had my PO at NIAID was Pat Repick, who has retired a few years ago. Fortunately, I don't think she was here when all of this stuff happened. But having conversations with her about my grants that would be scored and discussed but not funded, really that level of policy knowledge and what the institutional priorities were so helpful to me as an investigator to make sure that I was, doing the best science possible and proposing the best science possible, but also making sure that it was within NIH's priorities and it wouldn't overlap too much with any of my colleagues. And, it was going to serve basically the American people as best as it could. And that it's a really important job, even if most people don't know that that job exists.
Yeah, I quickly realized that job doesn't really exist anymore, not in that way. And I started seeing spreadsheets of grants that were going to be canceled, and we were asked to, think about changing words in grants and all sorts of this. In addition, I was in several meetings across the NIH where the leadership was trying to puzzle about how could we come up with initiatives to please RFK Jr. on the MAHA agenda. And I decided I didn't want to be involved in any of that. So I had been there for 22 years and I was eligible for the early retirement program. And I figured, you know what? If I take that, I get my health insurance for myself and my husband, and I can leave.
Yeah.
The pension is about this big. It basically pays for your insurance and your taxes. And then, but I thought that was the better bet than to sell my soul or continue to have nightmares, which is what I was doing, about what was happening inside the NIH. So I left. And a lot of really good people also left at the same time. A lot of my friends who also took the Vera and then on the other hand, we had all of our probationary or early career people. Many of those people lost their jobs because they were riffed. So you lost all the new people and all the super experienced people like me. And everyone who is left, I would say most of them are trying to fight for the good. And we can get into that and what they're up to. And those are my friends. Yeah.
I think that would be great because I think that also one thing that I think some of my colleagues might also find it helpful to hear, we're all going to have to make choices. We're going to have to make the choice as to whether or not we're going to be complicit with this.
That's right.
And I think, there are ways to continue working in academia and to continue working for the federal government where you're not. But I think for many people, they're going to be in the same position that you were. And I would argue that you still were riffed, because that would never have been necessarily offered or encouraged if they weren't trying to get rid of you too. Yes. I mean, I sort of see everybody who has lost their jobs, whether they were contract employee that was terminated, whether they were actually riffed, or whether, you know, they quit or took the, I can't remember the other path, or the fork in the road. God, it feels like it was a million years ago and it was barely a year ago. But, you know, however they left, they weren't going to leave otherwise. And that was the whole point of it.
That was the whole point. And as you know, in Project 2025, Russ Vought's vision for the NIH, and he has a vision for every little thing that he wants to get rid of, but the specific vision that he has for the NIH is that they should dissolve it and just give some block grants to the states. Now, the problem with that is he doesn't have the authority to do that. Only Congress could do such a stupid thing, which they wouldn't. And, you know, the next best thing is to hobble it. So that's what he's done. And this is a sort of what I would like to call the 1,000 paper cut strategy.
Yep.
First, you know, Doge rips in and just, you know, mass riff, take out the communications people, because Lord knows we don't want anyone to know what's going on, right? And the comms professionals are the ones that know how to get the word out to the public about everything that's happening in biomedical research. We need to lop that right off, because Americans can't know. So they were the first to go. And then centralize everything else to be under a control. Now, for folks who don't know, the NIH was one of the most popular agencies, and is quite large, about a $48 billion budget. And that's another reason why Russ Vought couldn't do what he did to USAID, to the NIH, right? People didn't know what USAID did, and it's much smaller. And so they could just put it in the wood chipper, like Elon Musk said.
And it's horrific. Has a horrific wrong. Was USAID's budget also congressionally appropriated? Or, yes. Yeah, so I guess the only way to get rid of it then is to shut the agency down, even though it's still illegal.
Yes. And what they did with USAID was wholly illegal. But because it is smaller, and because the American public doesn't really know much about it, or if you can, it's very easy to spin mis and disinformation about
Why
USAID.
Are we helping these people in this country? Why don't they help themselves?
Exactly.
What do we care if people in the Democratic Republic of Congo die from Ebola? We're not going to get it. We just keep Ebola out.
That's right. Whereas most Americans, if you ask them, do they want cures for cancer? Do they want cancer research? They're like, oh, yes, we do want that. So the popularity part has been a problem for Russell Vought. And so let's send Musk in and do some dirty work and get rid of all the experienced people like me by essentially taking their jobs away from them. I had intended to stay for at least another 10 years. I'm not old, you can see. I'm not a retiree. So let's make it intolerable. Let's put them in trauma, right? He said that.
Yeah.
And he did it. And I was going to work in person, and I was not allowed to talk to my grantees. I wasn't really allowed to do anything. So imagine I'm sitting in my office and Doge boys are walking around our building. And I figured, am I just here to get a paycheck? I'm not actually going to work. So that's why I decided there would be a better use for my time to leave.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And it would have been continually traumatic to remain in that environment unless you were willing to collaborate with them. And I think that's what we're seeing now with some people, is we're seeing the people, who, one of the areas I also work in is vaccines. And we're seeing a lot of this with these sort of performative congressional hearings and things like that, where you get these academics going in and it's like, oh yeah, I'm a big cancer expert. Turbo cancer is a thing. And here's my review that I wrote on it for my own journal that I'm the editor in chief of. And I'm going to testify to Congress now and use my academic credibility to basically launder this pseudoscientific bullshit that allows them to justify this agenda. And part of this means also attacking entire professional fields. And As a virologist, my entire field has been blamed for starting the COVID-19 pandemic. I've personally been blamed for helping Tony Fauci to cover it up. And I never understood what that was all about. I just thought it was a crazy conspiracy theory until last year when that lab leak website went up. COVID.gov, the site where you would find information about testing, turned into this insane lab leak site. And I highly recommend you just go look at it for the font choices alone. It is nuts. It's like a wedding invitation that Trump is strolling out of with a bunch of stuff about Governor Cuomo, because it's basically lifted entirely from the Select Subcommittee Republicans report on the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was when I understood what the lab leak is all about. My colleagues and I have written multiple papers in Science and Cell showing that it probably emerged naturally via the wildlife trade in Wuhan, China. But if virology research causes lab leaks and that causes pandemics, then we should get rid of all of that. And if, you know what, there's other types of research too that can cause other dangerous things to happen. We should get rid of that too. People don't trust it. That's the other thing. That's like plan C. If you can't say that it's dangerous, and you can't say that, well, it's not infectious diseases, but it's still dangerous. Well, we need to get rid of it because it's pointless. Like it's not doing anything. And, it's a waste of money. And we need to be focusing on the really important questions that people trust. This whole conversation about trust drives me crazy because I've never been judged in a grant application or when submitting a paper on how much somebody trusts this technology. Director Bhattacharya, in between podcasts, in the podcast too, has been saying, he cuts mRNA vaccine research. He gives $500 million to his buddy for developing flu vaccine technology that Jonas Salk beat him to 70 years ago. And it's all about, America doesn't trust this. Well, America doesn't trust them because, as you said, NIH is very popular. You guys are lying about it, all of it. They're lying about it to get rid of it because what I think the end game is also is Russell Vought not only doesn't, he's an ultra libertarian who doesn't think we should be doing this stuff and spending money on it at all. But he doesn't really want that money to go back to the taxpayers. He wants to illegally impound it and move it to the executive branch, which will give the oligarchs in charge a lot more money and also help them to consolidate power and further undermine our democracy. And, it's crazy to be having a conversation about that when we're talking about federal grant making policy. But I think anyways, that's where this is going.
That's right. And what they started to do with their dismantling last year, and everyone probably heard in the news, was they started canceling grants based on unfavored topics, keywords, anything DEI, gender, anything with minority populations, certainly vaccines,
mRNA.
mRNA, and all of that.
And also just transcription, translation.
Yes.
Anything that has like a prefix in it that might be DEI related or related to, a forbidden topic.
And they also have, it's anything that RFK Jr. has a weird obsession about or some pseudoscience theory. So I didn't even know about this, but apparently RFK Jr. doesn't believe that HIV is caused by a virus.
No, he doesn't. He's an HIV denialist. It's not totally clear to me if he thinks it's just drugs. He thinks it might be environmental and like hormones in the water or something. I have no idea.
But it's crazy. So on the basis of that, to please him, they have been systematically eliminating all of the good science coming out of NIAID that was really getting close to develop a cure for HIV. Isn't that bonkers? And I've been tracking all this, but they had an RFA all set to go. And I've been chronicling this on my Substack.
Maybe let's explain to people what an RFA is really quick.
So when there are specific areas of science that the NIH needs to encourage applications on, that meaning that they're not coming in on their own, maybe it's a completely new innovative area that no one knows to go in yet, they can develop what's called a request for applications. And usually they'll have a set aside of money attached to it too, to entice the applications. And it will be on a very specialized topic. So in this case, the RFA was titled Consortia for Structure-Based Immunogen Design for HIV. And what it was doing, or what it wanted to do, is there are researchers who now have been developing and neutralizing antibodies. And it's like the scientific foundation for the next generation of HIV vaccines, meaning you could get a vaccine to completely prevent you from getting it. And this technology is kind of a similar technology that underlies the mRNA vaccine development. And of course, that is demonized as well. So you've got two things going on here. One, we don't like mRNA technology for some reason. And then two, we don't believe that HIV is caused by AIDS. So that RFA, which was ready to go, was just out and out canceled. And so, yeah.
It's wild to me that Kennedy just gets away with saying this stuff that's crazier and crazier. And it's like he's like Trump in that way. He's kind of bulletproof. Almost the crazier he gets, like the more successful he is. But one thing I've observed about him too, and I underestimated him, in January of 2025, I was invited to write a piece for Foreign Policy magazine, sort of predicting what RFK Jr.'s effect would be, at least in my world. And at the time, well, still, actually, I'm quite worried about it, was H5N1, and sort of talking about all the different ways that he could screw that up and it would be catastrophic. And I really underestimated his abilities, though, as like a bureaucrat. I think that he's been very effective at exactly what you were talking about, the death by 1,000 paper cut strategy. So he knows how, without breaking the law, or at least with breaking the law with enough like plausible deniability, that he can get away with it, especially in this administration.
Yeah.
But he knows a lot of these ways behind the scenes, basically, that he can throw like a wrench into the works administratively to stop funding from actually occurring, even if Congress is like fund it. And one of the things we saw, I'm glad that this is supposedly changing, but I'm not sure that it's going to change, is he told 7 different congressional and Senate committees about a month ago that, he's not going to give money to Gavi, that they had appropriated, like, I think more than $1 billion, or $600 million, $700 million, a lot of money. Gavi is a vaccine alliance that makes sure that people around the world get vaccinated, which actually is quite important for America. If there's, viruses don't just stay where they are, and the world is a busy, mobile place. And I don't care how many racist things you say about immigrants. Actually, measles, for example, mostly it will get imported, but now it's all local transmission. So if there's cases of these vaccine preventable diseases in other parts of the world, they will come back here. And if you've got somebody who for the last 30 years has been undermining vaccination and has been, again, lying about it to destroy trust, you end up with measles outbreaks here, and we're probably not going to eliminate measles again for at least another 10 years, if that.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people don't understand that when he's sitting up in front of the HELP committee for the Senate, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and he's saying, I'm not going to fund Gavi, not only is he breaking the law, it is constitutionally defined that Congress appropriates funding for this, and he's supposed to make that happen. He's not qualified to make that decision. He's not authorized to make that decision. He made it anyways. And it was only when Marco Rubio this past week was like, we're going to re-engage with Gavi because of Ebola. However, re-engage doesn't mean actually give them the funds. And I feel like there's a lot of this stuff going on where I'm in this Ebola expert group with a bunch of people who've been working on Ebola for the last 15 years, which I have been too. Or even before. And they're like, this is such great news. Like, Gavi's going to get funded. Like, how do you think this is going to improve things in DRC right now? And I'm like, not at all. Re-engage doesn't mean actually doing what you're supposed to do. And I feel like there's just a lot of that. And so people aren't, again, picking up on this because it's all happening behind the scenes and it's all boring and bureaucratic. And, the effects of it are not immediately obvious either. That's one of the biggest challenges as well with communicating vaccine policy decisions. It's boring to most people. And it's not like, oh, we cancel, the HBV vaccine and tomorrow, like 500 kids have hepatocellular carcinoma. It'll be decades before we actually see the effects of some of these policies, but that doesn't make them any less destructive.
That's right. And so, the 1,000 paper cuts strategy, get rid of the staff, traumatize the staff, centralize things. Each of those 27 institute centers and offices has a director, and they all had decisional making capacity. Let's take that away from them. So everything's centralized to, Jay Bhattacharya, who's the puppet. He will do whatever RFK Jr. or Russell Vogt tells him to do.
Do podcast.
Yeah.
Go to CPAC.
Right. And they started canceling grants last year. And of course, it went into the courts and it was determined that this was illegal. But then, of course, the Supreme Court, which is also another story, they didn't say that they were wrong. Yeah, it's illegal, but you have to sue in a different way or something like that, sort of a technicality. But the upshot is they were ordered to reinstate those grants, and not all of them got reinstated. People think that things got back to normal. They didn't. Some of them got to get back up and going, but some of them was too late to get back going. And some of the grants, if they were not in a state that was party to the suit, too bad, so sad, your grant is still canceled. So there were a number of grants that never got reinstated or just was impossible to reinstate. But because the courts didn't really like Russell Vogt's strategy, now he's got a new one. And this is what's happening. And people need to pay attention. It's very, very, very boring. Every year, the federal government spends about $1 trillion in grants. And ever since about 2017, they developed, or maybe in 2014 rather, they developed this document that's called 2 CFR 200. And you're saying, why do I care about that? So basically,
well, I mean, the Code of Federal Regulations could have catchier titles. I have to say.
Yeah. So the Code of Federal Regulations, and this is the this 2 CFR 200, so it's a particular code of regulations, is one that's used by the Office of Management Budget, which we call OMB. And basically, it is essentially a document that was called Uniform Guidance. And OMB expressly does not have regulatory powers, but what OMB does is it helps dispense the money that Congress appropriates to all the different federal agencies. It's almost like the banker go-between. And
it's
so
the accounting department.
Yeah. It
and
tracks it all. Yep, tracks it all, goes into the right accounts. And this documentation was guidance for all of the agencies, essentially about the best practices, about audit requirements, all the rules around grant making. And so that they could have this guidance and implement their grant programs based on their mission. So, for example, I worked at the NIH for 22 years, so I know how that works. At the NIH, I like to tell people we had 3 real main groups of employees, people like me who are the program scientists. We have our scientific review colleagues, but there's also the business people, and we call those the grant specialists, right? They know all the ins and outs of CFR 200 and everything therein, because they have to give those notice of awards to the letter of the law, right? What's allowable cost, what's not allowable cost, boring. But it was all guidance. So the NIH could interpret all of those rules based on what was best for the science. So as an example, in science, we all produce research findings that need to get published, right? That's a particular thing that happens in science. So for years and years and years, since the 70s even, using some of your grant monies to help publish in journals was called an allowable cost. And you can find it in the rules, right? So that's just an example of how boring these rules are. But what Russell Vogt is doing now is he's writing a rule change of this CFR 200. And I was given a document from a former OMB staffer who shared with me, basically, if you overlay the existing document with the newly proposed one, it'll highlight in red everything that's being deleted and in green everything that's being added. In every single instance in that document where the word guidance is given, it's replaced with the word regulations. So essentially, what he's doing is taking a guidance document and hoping to turn it into a regulatory document by replacing that word over 400 times in the document. I don't think that is necessarily going to work, but that's what he's going to do. And what he is hoping will happen now is, instead of having guidance giving, he's producing an edict. And in that body of the edict is a whole host of ways that will really hinder the grants process. And that's what I published on my Substack that you can all read about. And that was the document that has been going viral. I produced that summary of 18 things that he wants to do. And number one in the list is, instead of having the agencies and, for example, scientific peer review be the driving factor for what gets funded by the NIH, all grant making will now be required to be politically reviewed and approved. So basically, every grant will be subject to this criteria, and the political people will have to determine if each grant, and this is in quotes, demonstrably advances the president's policy priorities. Okay.
Amazing that they actually only want evidence for that.
Yeah. But
the only thing you have to demonstrate.
Yeah, well, also no DEI, because if you're obviously doing bad things if you're doing DEI. All these buzzwords of gender ideology, and then they throw things in like you need to do gold standard science, whatever that means. But basically, if I were to boil it down, this entire rule document is comprised of reasons that Russell Vogt's people could either deny your grant from being paid at all, or it also gives them unilateral authority to cancel any existing grant retroactively. So if you had a grant canceled from the NIH last year that was reinstated, you should be very worried about this rule, because if this rule passes, I believe Russell Vogt will go back down to that list and recancel all of those grants.
Oh, yeah.
And many, many more for that matter. And he believes that writing the word regulation in this guidance document gives him the authority to do that. Now, of course, we're going to have to wait until it's implemented and sue on the back end to find out if he's right. But as you know, people's lives will be affected in the meantime. So that's one thing. Each of the provisions in here is another reason or cause for him either to deny you a grant, or to cancel your grant, or to just politically police the kinds of things you can say, or the kinds of people who will even be eligible for a grant in the first place, right? This is really deep, dark, draconian stuff.
It's terrible. And, again, not to force everybody to read history, but do look at the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, because my husband is from the Soviet Union. He's about 20 years older than me. And he got a PhD in the Soviet Union at the Shemaikin Institute of Bioorganic Chemistry. And, I'm not old either. He's not that old, but he did his PhD in the late 80s, early 90s, moved to the US and never went back right before the Soviet Union collapsed. So he's actually never been to the Russian Federation, because when he left, he was still a Soviet citizen. But, the reason he left, and the reason why almost all of his colleagues left, was not because there was Lysenkoist stuff going on anymore. That ended when a little bit before Lysenko died, a little after Stalin died in the 1960s, late 1950s. But it caused so much stagnation that even though the current Soviet government was trying to catch up, they never could. And one of the reasons was because, and this is a fun story, my husband was a protein biochemist. He was one of the team that discovered activin A and what it does, which is an important developmental factor during development. So he was a Nature paper, and he's the middle author on his own Nature paper from when he was a PhD, because all of these commissars, these political censors who had to review everything, were so embedded within the scientific research enterprise that there was no way anybody could get anything done, because they just had to appease all of these bureaucrats. And they essentially made these rules. And Joseph Stalin was more powerful than Russell Vogt, but they made all these rules that was basically the same thing. They just like started making edicts, and you had to follow them, or in Stalin's case, you might end up in a gulag. But, you know, I have to say, I'm very concerned that some of my colleagues are going to end up in prison as well, basically, essentially for doing science that isn't politically wanted. And that doesn't mean that the science itself is bad science or it's dangerous. It means that that science is actually legitimate science that contradicts the pseudoscience that they want to fund so that it can support more MAHA and MAGA initiatives.
That's
And
right.
Russell Vogt, I mean, has been trying this from the beginning, where he's issuing, I call it the kitchen sink approach, and Kennedy's doing the same thing. They just throw all of this stuff out there and see what sticks.
Yep.
This was what happened with indirect costs. You know, that was initially what Russell Vogt tried. So there are facilities and administration costs for all of you who aren't into grants so much that you know what indirect costs are. When you get a grant, you get direct costs. That's the money that you need to pay your salaries, to pay your students, to fund the research itself, to pay for anything that you're actually going to do scientifically. And then your university will get a certain percentage that's negotiated between each university and the federal government every couple of years. And historically, you know, these indirect costs have ballooned so that they're quite large in some cases, but whatever, we could change that. We don't have to just drop it. And so basically what he did was he said, we're going to cut it at 15% across the board. And what people don't understand, like I was on, you know, NPR and like the news and stuff talking about this, and a lot of my colleagues were too, just trying to explain to people that this isn't the universities being greedy. This is like keeping the lights on. This is paying like the people who, you know, take the garbage out. Indirect costs are part of the cost of doing science, because the cost of doing science pays for not only the research, but the buildings that the research are in, you know, the benefits that those researchers need, like healthcare and stuff like that. Indirect costs cover all the institutional costs of doing science, which can be extremely high, especially if like you do what I do and you need a containment laboratory, or you work in a hospital and you need specialized equipment for patient care, things like that. It's very expensive. And so cutting it to 15% from the average rate was around 60%, I think. Cutting it to 15% would effectively shut down every single research institution. And so obviously this didn't stick. It was very across the board. And I think now the new strategy is to do this, where it's making all these edicts. We'll see if they stick, but maybe doing it more piecemeal like this will allow, you know, different phases of people to be phased out.
Yeah, and what they'll do is there'll be far fewer grants that are actually approved for funding, which we're already doing that at the NIH, by the way, right? There were 20% fewer grants awarded last year than there was in 2024. But this will compound that problem, because if every single one of those tens of thousands of NIH grants has to go to a political review, imagine how long that takes. And these are people who are not scientists, right? They are political appointees, and they're putting a political test on it, which is kind of opaque, right? And you won't know that you didn't get your grant because it was politically unapproved. You won't know, because you're not going to know. Who's going to tell you? Maybe
somehow I feel like it's not going to be on, well, still call them the pink sheets, but you know, the review documents that come out of a study section. For all the people who've never applied for an NIH grant, you usually get these documents that have your score on it, and whether your grant was discussed or not. And then it will have the reviews from the study section, as well as usually commentary from program officers like Liz, and usually there's a blurb from the scientific review officer as well, who oversees the review process. And, now what's that going to say? Historically, it's always been scientific. Like, it's like, you need better controls, or you need to, usually they're like, you need to do more stuff to like prove that this grant is going to be high impact enough, but it's always been scientific.
And that's by law, I should point out. The statute that was designed the NIH after World War II, those statutes that govern the NIH require that the decisions are based on scientific peer review. That is outside the government. So that's how these study sections began, by law. So for each area of biomedical research, there were hundreds of study sections on those topics, and you could convene special sections for the RFAs, like I talked about. And it was peer review. So you subject your ideas to your peers, and they help the NIH determine whether those ideas are ready for prime time, right? And then there's a second level of review that was also required by law, and those are the advisory councils. So each institute and center had one. Now they're dwindling, but those were also external scientists chosen for their expertise, and they look at the review from the study sections and make sure that it was done well, that they concur, maybe they don't concur, right? Then they give their advice to the directors. It's not until all of that happens that the institute center directors are allowed to even fund the grants. And then what we would do is we would take the scores and we take the ratings and all of our discussions, and as scientific program officials and directors, we would generally fund the best, most meritorious ideas with the money we had for that year, right? So how much money do we have? How many of these great grants can we fund until we run out of money? And that's how it was decided every year. That's not how it's going to be decided anymore. Number one, they might continue this peer review process almost as a charade. They probably will.
They're definitely going to. I have a feeling that they're going to populate the study sections with people who are on board with the plan and less interested perhaps in conducting as rigorous of a review as in the past.
Well, one of the things that they're going to do, and we can talk about, they're already significantly dismantling review. And my colleagues at 27 United published a wonderful, not wonderful in the topics, but a comprehensive is probably the better word, explanation about what has been done to the peer review at NIH. And I encourage you to take a look at that. I restacked it today. But one of the things that's coming down the pike, and I'm hearing ramblings that there'll be an RFI about this, which they don't listen to. This just means they're going to implement it, but they're going to get rid of scores in review, because at the end of the day, they don't need scores if they're going to take it politically anyway. So why go through the charade of having scores? They're just going to bin them in like good.
I like you're making the process more efficient.
Yeah.
They're just not even trying to hide it anymore.
Exactly. So now the political review will be basically, maybe, who knows, maybe OMB will have a checklist. I'm not approving it because it doesn't advance priorities, or this one's too DEI. This one's not gold standard-y enough. This one has foreign involvement.
Also, I should add, there is no gold standard. I keep looking for when they define what gold standard is. A standard suggests that there's like a quantifiable standard.
Yeah,
but it's just gold.
It's a buzzword, and for people who are not in the know, it might sound reasonable, but it's totally not. Now they're not going to allow any international scientific collaboration anymore, because it's all domestic first. That's their whole thing. We want a domestic first framework, which is bonkers, because last I checked, having our scientists engage with the other great scientists around the world has been nothing but great for science. But okay,
I mean, I have to say, it's very annoying to me as an American who works at a Canadian research institution. I am American, but yet I'm still considered a foreigner for these purposes. And that's why I haven't applied for NIH grants in the past year. It's a waste of my time completely. Up until now, there's not even been a mechanism to apply as a foreign, there used to be these foreign subawards, and this actually comes into my field as well, because of all of the lab leak stuff, which we can discuss another time. foreign subawards have been implicated in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's completely not true. But it was a foreign subaward to China, to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And because it's China and it's the pandemic and it's Tony Fauci who issued it, even though the NIAID director, I'm quite certain, was not reviewing individual NIH subawards. That's a great story. And this is exactly where the boring aspect of policy comes in, and we're at a disadvantage. Because if we want to be accurate, we have to talk about the boring aspects of policy.
That's right.
But the other side can just make shit up. And they can make it as exciting and terrible as they want to. And that is, oh, well, if we didn't have these foreign subawards, Fauci would never have been able to give, and it was a tiny amount of money too for a federal grant. It was like $200,000 or something in direct cost to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And why is Tony Fauci funding China to do this dangerous work? The reality is, though, those programs actually came out of the follow-up to SARS-1 coming out. And at the time, China did not have a well-developed scientific research enterprise. And so they actually approached the US and other countries in Western Europe and said, can you please help us set up a coronavirus research program? And we did incredible work. EcoHealth Alliance, Ralph Barrick, all of these people who were involved with these grants did really incredible work. And that was why we were able to make COVID vaccines in 10 months as opposed to 10 years. It's because of that foundational work that happened with these foreign countries. And yes, even China. It actually also improved diplomatic relations between the US and China, which generally I think is actually kind of a good thing. I think most people would agree that it's a good thing. Most people don't want to be constantly adversarial with China. And now I fear that, that's a whole separate conversation. But foreign policy wise, our defunding of NIH and these other organizations that are related to health and science is really going to hurt us diplomatically. I'm here at a global health security conference. The reason I'm not wearing any makeup is because it's almost 6 a.m. here, and I've been up for a couple hours because I'm really jet lagged, and it still took me a long time to get conference ready. So I'll have to finish up after our call. But I'm looking forward to talking to all of my international colleagues about how what the U.S. is doing is actually going to affect global health security and our national security, because I don't think people have really either thought about what is it going to be like for our national security when our hospitals are overwhelmed with kids with measles. We have a measles epidemic somewhere, and then there's a surge in seasonal flu, or even worse, there's a flu pandemic. What happens to our country from a national security standpoint, besides the health standpoint and an economic standpoint? What happens when we have so many sick people that we can't take care of them all? What happens when we don't have any sort of options at all for innovating and developing new technologies in the face of a health crisis? I mean, it's a huge issue for all Americans. And I don't think that people really understand that, okay, it's not just academic researchers not being able to do their fun science that they want to do. It's truly all of our lives.
That's right.
I wanted to, before, we're kind of coming up on an hour here, but I think we need to have maybe more sessions. Maybe we should have a regular session.
Right. And it would take too long to go through all of the problems in this rule, but lucky for you, you can just go to my Substack and read the most detrimental things. But the most important part we should tell people is that we have to try and fight back. What they want us to do is lay over and go, oh, well, nothing can be done, or think it's just worthless. Why try? That's what they're counting on, that we're just overwhelmed and we'll do nothing. So,
and also it's so boring that nobody's going to pay attention, because there aren't that many people actually like you who are going to actually pull out and see that he changed guidance to regulations throughout this document, and to understand what the implications of that are.
That's right. So every time a rule is changed, even for good reasons, they need to have a comment period. So right now it's posted on what's called the Federal Register. It's a website, and it is open for public comment. That means anybody can comment. Now, they are required by law to read and respond to all the comments. So our strategy really here is to flood the register with as many comments as possible, but also, and some of them, can just be very lay comments, and that's great, but what my intention is to really mobilize the scientific community in particular, because we can write really well-reasoned, that's what you do for a living, right? Comments with citations and everything, and they are required to respond to those things, right? So that's one reason why you want to, if you have the ability, if you have the time and the know-how, and if your career is hinging on this, it behooves you to do this. And I also have instructions on my Substack to help you do that as well. So the strategy here is, let's flood the zone. As a context, the Schedule F, which took civil service protections away from thousands of employees, when that rule went through, I believe they got about 40,000 comments. And
the Schedule F, just to clarify for people who don't know, it's a different classification for federal employees, right? That allows them to be terminated more easily or let go from their jobs more easily.
That's right. And that rule got about 40,000 comments, which they ignored, and then it went implemented, and it's going to be challenged in court now. My thinking is, we have far more than 40,000 scientists and recipients of grants across just the science agencies alone. If you take NSF, NASA, DOE, NIH, DARPA, on and on and on, everyone who gets a grant, right? That's a lot of people, right? If every one of them were to write a comment and then take it out to the states, all of your block grants, your Head Start grants, your education grants, your transportation grants, your park grants, that's up for grabs too. We could easily get 1 million comments, right?
Yeah.
You would think that would be doable. What happens is, because this rule was created under what's called the Congressional Review Act, there's a reporting requirement. If there's a sufficient number of comments, Congress is going to get pinged for this, okay? They're going to get notified, and they have the power to pass a joint resolution and make the whole thing go away. Now, do I think the Republicans who control Congress are going to do that on their own? No. That's why we also want to couple it with phone calls and emails, and you're going to flood your representative, especially if you have a GOP representative, in addition to your comment, you're going to bug the heck out of them. And we need to try and shame them into doing something. That's one strategy. Now, if this thing goes into effect, all of the comments that are in there become part of the historical record and become part of the discovery for the lawsuits. Okay. This is another reason why you want to put all of your good thoughts into why this would be catastrophic for the American scientific enterprise, right? Because that's going to become part of the record, and it's going to help the lawyers argue the case. Okay. So, yeah.
It's demonstrably showing that it's not consistent with the president's priorities of making America the greatest nation in the world.
Exactly. So,
I mean, the thing is, I'm going to submit a comment that is very detailed about science, but I'm also going to say, I like driving on the roads. I like driving on roads that aren't going to crumble beneath my car. I like having parks. I like having fire departments and police and public health systems, and I like having people to take the garbage out and make sure that the water's not going to kill me if I drink it. I like all of the services, and I don't need it, but I like children to be able to eat. I like kids to have school lunches and supplemental nutrition. I think that as a member of society, I'm not such a selfish person that I think that only things that benefit me personally are worth saving. And I think that most Americans are like that. I think that most of us want to live in a happy, healthy society where our kids are protected and where we're safe and where, we have all the luxuries that we've taken for granted this whole time. Good health, good infrastructure, good economy. And that is what is at stake here. And I think that people really need to speak up. So like Liz was saying, this is going to be on her Substack, and when I post this video afterwards, I'm going to have links to all of this stuff there. I'll post it also on Instagram, and we'll share it around. Save America movement will help us amplify it as well. And 27 United is we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the Bethesda Declaration. And so they've got some stuff coming out about that too. And I know that we're going to be keeping this in like the public discussion, which I think is really important.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot going on. Keep your head on a swivel.
Yeah. I mean, just try to take a break when you need to. Yesterday, I mean, I'm super jet lagged again. Like it took a long time to get here, and I've been having these medical issues, so I don't always feel great, especially when I travel. And I went to the spa and just took a couple hours off where I couldn't even look at my phone, and I got a massage, and it made me feel a lot better. I really encourage people to do stuff like that, but when you're coming back to it, like pay attention, because this is going to profoundly affect everybody, not just scientists.
Yes. And we're here to help. So hit us up on our socials. We've got resources. We're going to be doing some virtual workshops to help people write their comments. I've posted about all these things. You can sign up. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I think that having these resources is going to be so helpful, and getting us all together, the group of people who are speaking up about this. I know you've been really vocal from the beginning, it feels like. I mean, I found you through your Substack, but I've been following you pretty much since that first article. And I think that there's more and more of us all the time who are speaking up about this. And between all of us with our various expertise and experience, I feel like we can reach all of the people who have a lot of different questions for us about like what this means. And also one of the biggest questions I get is like, what can I do?
Right.
And some of this is as simple as exactly what you just said. Write a comment, a thoughtful, like, developed comment that is meaningful and that they'll have to respond to, but also call your congressperson. And I still do call mine, even though I'm a resident. I maintain a residence in Washington State. So near Seattle. So I'm all Democrat, but I still tell Patty Murray, who has her foot on everybody's neck at the help committee meetings, that I expect her to keep doing that. And if there was a Republican elected in my district, I would expect them to do that as well. And I think that it's really important to put pressure on all of our elected representatives, because that is something that can potentially move the needle.
That's right. But what I'm concerned about is I'm hearing from a lot of people that some of the universities and institutions are afraid to respond, and they may be silent. And they're also cautioning their faculty to not respond because they're worried about retaliation. But what I want to say is this: look, if you go to the Federal Register, you can respond anonymously. Your employer won't know. No one will know. And even an anonymous comment is still better than not commenting at all. So please do your duty. And if you're afraid, or if you've been instructed not to, you can use the anonymous feature on the website.
Absolutely. I think that's so important to say, because whether you put your name to it or not, and some people are not able to, and I completely understand that, it's still important to speak up and do whatever you can. I get asked this a lot. A lot of people say, I can't be you, Angie. I can't be telling Jay Bhattacharya to fuck off, which, I've done multiple times. I don't expect most people to do that. They're not me. But, I feel that one of my favorite things on the Bill of Rights is item number 1, and that's my free speech, my right to free speech. I keep getting told that we shouldn't be political because we're supposed to be scientific and objective all the time. But the fact is, a democracy, by definition, everybody participates in the political system. That is what a democracy is. And, our entire democracy is under threat. It's not just science. Our entire way of life, our entire country. I love that you called it doing your duty, because I do feel that this is doing my duty as an American citizen. I never served my country in the military, so I'm serving it now that it's imperiled. And
right.
I really encourage everybody to do that in whatever way is safe and feels right to you, because I think that the more of us speak up, also the safer it becomes for us to do so. So also, one last thing from me: don't listen to your universities when they give you advice on how to exercise your civil rights. Universities are great, but the idea that they are these like havens of scholarship and intellectual freedom is total bullshit. Institutions are essentially large corporations. They're just academic corporations, and they are not serving the interests necessarily of science. They are serving the interests of their board, and they're serving the institutional interests, which means making sure that they keep their endowments and making sure that they're not, dealing with problematic things with the federal government. And their bottom line ultimately is making sure that the institution survives, not necessarily that they're doing the right thing. Individual people need to step up and do the right things. And we form our own institutions, like the Save America movement, like 27 United, like many of the organizations our colleagues have put together to fight back against this. We form our own institutions because our institutions aren't going to save us. We have to save ourselves.
That's right. And let me just say one thing. Everybody stay tuned tomorrow, because my wonderful colleagues, my scientific colleagues at the NIH who are fighting, the ones that are fighting, they have something for you, and they'll be releasing it tomorrow. It's been 1 year since the Bethesda Declaration, and they are going to chronicle for you what's been going on and how things are with the state of things now, a year later. And it's a barn burner. It's really sad. Anyone who thinks the NIH is fine, you will be really sad to see this document, but you need to know the truth.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think, we're just going to be going through a really difficult time where we're going to be seeing a lot of stuff that is heartbreaking and truly profoundly bad. And it's going to be, as you said, traumatizing. It's going to be very difficult. I feel like we're already very traumatized, many of us who've been in this field, and especially those of us who've been speaking up. But that said, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'd rather not be traumatized, but that's the reality. I mean, this is the fate of our democracy, and it's all of our fates, essentially. And if there was ever a time to step up and do something about it, now is the time, no matter how hard it is. So I completely agree. As the science chair of the Save America movement, we have signed on to endorse what our colleagues at 27 United are doing tomorrow. And so we'll be all talking about that. And I, again, encourage you to, do something nice for yourself, but suck it up at some point and open your eyes to the truth of what's happening. Because if we just kind of stick our heads in the sand, one day we're going to realize that if we were quiet and they came for all of us loudmouths first, they're still going to come for you. It doesn't matter if you appease them or not. That's not the point. And I think when we started off talking about Russ Vough, he doesn't care. I don't think he has principles other than don't spend any money in the federal government and give it all to the executive branch, essentially. And hurt as many people as possible in the process, because that's the only way he's going to be able to get away with it. That to me is just a completely un-American and unacceptable way of having our elected leaders, and he's not elected, but Senate confirmed, our leaders leading our country. And that's not what we voted for. So we need to make sure that this stops. And also we need to, we can make things better. We don't have to burn the whole goddamn thing to the ground. We could go back to what we had that was working, get rid of the things that didn't work, and, make it better in terms of how the federal government operates, including NIH and all of our scientific and public health enterprises. So you're going to be hearing a lot more from all of us, and I'm definitely going to be having Liz back here to talk about this. Keep an eye out for what 27 United is going to be doing tomorrow, and I'll have this posted up on my Substack shortly with links to everything, including all of Liz's incredible Substacks, which, believe it or not, they're about policy, but they are really engaging. I know about some of these policies, but it's a real skill. It's something that I've been trying to work on because, again, trying to communicate policy to people is really, really challenging, and you do an exceptional job of it. So please go check out elizabethginexi.substack.com. There will be links at rasmussenretorts.substack.com on my Twitter, on all of my social media accounts, and we'll amplify it through the Save America movement as well. And thanks to our friends at 27 United also for everything that they've been doing. I wish that you guys were all still at NIH, but I'm so proud of you and thankful for your service when you were there, as well as what you're doing now to help us all. And you, Liz, thank you for being a public servant for 22 years and making sure that the best science was getting funded, because a lot of the achievements and economic benefits from what NIH did is because of Liz and all of her colleagues who made sure that we were funding science that was going to have a really positive impact on America and the world. So thanks so much, everybody. Keep following us, follow and subscribe for more information, because we're going to be keeping our foots on their necks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Take care, everybody.